This video is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino.
All right, who's ready to get mad at me? I'm going to give you my 2024 conference championship game predictions. I'm going to let you know who I think is making the conference championship games for all four of the power conferences and who I think is going to win those conference championship games. Good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it is me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you're not already. I post pointless, barely watchable college football content year-round. We do call-in shows every Tuesday and Thursday night year-round, Saturdays during the season, which, by the way, is only 6 days away with week 0 set to kick off next Saturday. Live streams all day on Saturdays during the college football season. We have a really good time here. If you're new, go ahead and click the subscribe button. You'll be glad you did. Shout out to BetUS. They are sponsoring this video today, so check them out. The link is in the description down below. Right now, they got a great deposit bonus going. They're going to give you a 125% bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. And as I get ready to go through these predictions that I have for you for the conference championship games, I'm actually going to pull BetUS up, put them on the screen, and I'm going to show you what the odds are for these teams that I'm picking so you can get an idea of exactly how crazy I am. I've been doing these team by team prediction videos for about 2.5 months now. I haven't done every team. I've done enough teams in each conference now to be able to go back through them and determine a conference championship game for each conference. Couple of things have surprised me here as I sat down and started writing this out today. Number one, some of my preconceived notions about who I thought was going to be in the conference championship games are out the window. See, it's one thing to just sort of think about a conference, think about the teams in it, who are the favorites, who do you think the best kind of 2 teams are that may end up in a conference championship game. That's one thing. When you sit down and go game by game through all of these team schedules and you're marking winners and losers for specific games, it sometimes eliminates teams from conference championship games that maybe before you thought had a chance to be there. And there's a couple of examples of that I'm going to give you here today. But, just because I think, for example, Team A is going to make the conference championship game 2 months ago, I sit down and do a bunch of prediction videos. Well, the schedules are so vastly different from team to team within the same conferences. There are teams and situations here where I've got a team that I think is really good, but maybe they're 9-3 or even 10-2, which is really good. But there are 2 other teams within that same conference that when I did their predictions, I had them coming out at 11-1, or maybe they had the same record, 10-2, but they had a win over the Team A. So it sort of eliminates some of the teams that I thought, again, if you'd asked me 3 months ago, kind of off the top of my head, if I would have named these conference championship games, it may not be exactly what I winded up on here today. We're going to start with the ACC. Here you go. First, I'm going to show you the odds from over at BetUS. Again, the link is in the description down below. Make sure you check them out. 125% bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. You can see here that the favorite, according to the odds makers over at BetUS right now, are Florida State at plus 290, Clemson at plus 350, Miami at plus 400, Louisville at plus 800, on down the line there. After going through and doing a bunch of prediction videos for a bunch of teams within the ACC, I ended up with Miami at 10-2. And that's good enough to get them into the ACC championship game. I know they've only made it there once before, and they lost. And believe me, I know the history of Miami and the ACC. It's been really bad. They've been in there 20 years and they've never won it. But I've got them making it this year at 10-2, and they will be playing Virginia Tech. If you'd asked me 2 months ago, I would not have picked Virginia Tech to make the ACC title game. They were a dark horse kind of topic of conversation for a lot of the offseason because they got a lot of returning production and their schedule is favorable. Do I think they're a better team than Florida State? Probably not. What about Louisville? Maybe not. NC State? But when I did all these records for all these teams, and again, the schedules are so different, I've got Virginia Tech coming up at 10-2, same as Miami. Now, they play during the regular season, Virginia Tech and Miami do. And I've got Virginia Tech winning that game. It's a weird Friday night game. We see a lot of weird things happen on Friday nights. I've got Virginia Tech going on the road, beating Miami in the regular season, setting up a rematch in the ACC championship game in Charlotte, in which I think Miami will win. I've got Miami winning the ACC for the first time in 2024. And yes, I am prepared for all the comments that I'm going to get about that prediction. If I had to pick a dark horse, or if I had to pick some other team, if you were to tell me you're going to be wrong, Lou, one of those teams is not getting in or whatever. Okay, who would be sort of my next choices? Well, my default would be to sort of lean on who I just think the best or most talented teams in the ACC are. That would be somebody like a Florida State or a Clemson. My issue with Clemson, I think they've got too many holes to fill, and they've got a brutal schedule, especially the first 5 weeks of the season. In their first 5 games, they played Georgia, App State, Florida State, and NC State. They could potentially lose all 4 of those. I don't think they are. I think they're going to be 3-2 or 2-3. If they're 3-2 and one of those losses is to Georgia, that's a non-ACC loss. So really it's just one ACC loss. Then I think they're still alive at that point to potentially get to Charlotte for the ACC title game. If they're 2-3 after the first 5 games, or if they have 2 ACC losses after those first 5 games, maybe they lose to Florida State and NC State. I think by that point, they will have already played themselves out of the ACC title game. Offensive line issues. The quarterback is a turnover machine. They lost Will Shipley. We'll see how Maffa is now that he's sort of the go-to guy instead of kind of the backup go-to guy. And I still think they lack at wide receiver versus what they had in their prime 4, 5, 6 years ago. So that's why I have them missing out. I think I have them at 8-4. Florida State, I could obviously see making the ACC championship game. And again, if you'd asked me 3 months ago to just pick 2 teams, Florida State would have been one of the 2 teams I probably would have picked to end up there. But again, after going through and doing all these prediction videos, I believe I actually have Florida State at 10-2 as well, or maybe 9-3. I think it's 10-2 though. But they're 2 ACC losses, whereas only one of Virginia Tech's losses is an ACC loss, and they have one of their losses is to Miami, so therefore Miami would own the tiebreaker over Florida State, which is why I've got Miami in over FSU. Again, I could be completely wrong on this, obviously, and if I am, Florida State is one of those teams who I think will be right there in line for the ACC championship game. As far as dark horses or sort of out of the blue teams, well, I'm kind of picking the dark horse to actually make it with Virginia Tech. If we go back and look at the odds here, you'll see Virginia Tech is way down here in 8th place? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So they've actually got the 6th or 7th best odds. I guess it's the 6th best odds here. North Carolina's out of place here at plus 3,000. So I guess Virginia Tech has got the 6th best odds to win the ACC. I've actually got them in the ACC title game. So I technically am picking a dark horse there. Another one to keep an eye out for would be NC State. Again, a team with a favorable schedule. My issue with NC State is just, well, sort of the same issue I have with Miami, honestly. You kind of hear rumblings about NC State every year or 2 or 3, but then you look up at the end of the year and they're sitting there at 8-4 again. Or in the case of Miami, 5-7 or 6-6 or 7-5 or whatever the case. But NC State is a team that is good enough if some things go their way to get to the ACC title game. And of course, Louisville is sort of, I feel bad for Louisville, and I'm guilty of this myself. I'm not blaming anyone else. Louisville last year, in their first year under new head coach Jeff Brom, did everything they had to do. They made it to the ACC championship game, of course, coming up a little bit short to Florida State. But the point is, they made it to the ACC championship game. And then here we are in the offseason heading into another season. And it seems like just no one mentions Louisville, really. They obviously talk about Clemson, Miami, and Florida State, sort of the big 3 within the ACC, right? There's a lot of chatter about Virginia Tech and maybe how big of a step they can take this year because of everything they have coming back after the way they finished last season. NC State is a big topic of conversation. And then sort of in the last 30 seconds or so of discussing the ACC, people will throw Louisville in there, kind of like I just did. So I'm admitting it does seem disrespectful the way people talk about Louisville or the way they don't talk about Louisville, and I'm guilty of it myself. They clearly could make the ACC title game. They proved that last season. I've got Virginia Tech versus Miami, though, so there you go. That's it for the ACC. Let's move on next to the Big Ten. First, I'll show you the odds. Here they are. The favorite to win the Big Ten this season, Ohio State at plus 145. Second place, Oregon at plus 200. Third best odds are Michigan, followed by Penn State. And if you look over at the odds, you can see Ohio State is at plus 145. Penn State is at plus 500, the 4th place team. That's all pretty close. But from 4th to 5th, Southern Cal is a huge drop-off from plus 500 all the way down to plus 2,000. So anybody, Southern Cal or below, that wins the Big Ten, it would be a massive upset, dark horse, whatever you want to call it. If it's not one of these first 1, 2, 3, 4 teams here that wins the Big Ten, then it's going to be a massive upset, and that means somebody here was a huge disappointment. But those are the odds according to BetUS. Again, the link is in the description. You can check them out. But those are the odds as of right now to win the Big Ten. Now, what does Uncle Lou think is going to happen in the Big Ten? Well, this is something that this is an example of something that I've been talking about really going back to February. Haven't changed my mind about it. And then even after I went through and did the game-by-game predictions, it actually worked out that way. But if you've been watching this channel over the course of the offseason, you know I'm really high on two teams in particular in the Big Ten, the two favorites, Ohio State and Oregon. Now, these two teams play in the regular season. Ohio State has to travel to Eugene to play Oregon. And again, I've done team-by-team prediction videos where I go through the schedule and pick a winner and a loser for every single week. In other words, I'm not just looking at the schedule and going, looks like 10-2, or probably 11-1. If I think a team's going to go 10-2, I actually tell you the two games I think they're going to lose, or the one game I think they're going to lose, or whatever the case is. When I went through the Ohio State and the Oregon schedules, you probably know this. Oregon is the only team I have predicted to go undefeated in the regular season in 2024. Not Georgia, not Bama, not Texas, not Ohio State, not anybody else. Oregon is the only team. I've got them going undefeated in the regular season, so you know I've got them penciled into the Big Ten title game at 12-0 with a home win over Ohio State. They will be playing Ohio State, who I have at 11-1, their only loss being on the road to Oregon. Now, Ohio State's got a couple of potential stumbling blocks that could prevent them from making it there. They got to play a difficult road game at Penn State, although they have had Penn State's number lately. They, of course, play Michigan at home to end the season, and a couple other potential trap games thrown in there as well. In the case of Oregon, first year into the Big Ten, almost any week could be a potential trap week. They're going to be playing in a lot of unfamiliar environments. They've got a couple of difficult road games they've got to make. They have to play, I believe, at Michigan, for example. I'm just a buyer in Oregon for this year. I think they're that good. I think they get the job done. So I've got Ohio State and Oregon meeting in a rematch for the Big Ten championship game, with Ohio State getting revenge and beating Oregon. I actually think Ohio State is a little bit better of a team than Oregon. I even said this in my prediction videos. The Ohio State-Oregon game in the regular season is played in Oregon. If it was played at Columbus or anywhere else, any type of neutral site, I would have picked Ohio State to win that game in the regular season. Of course, the Big Ten championship game is played at a neutral site in Indianapolis every year. And so I've got Ohio State winning the rematch. So it's actually two examples here so far within the ACC and the Big Ten where I've got rematches. Virginia Tech and Miami playing the regular season. I've got Virginia Tech winning, but then having a rematch against Miami in the ACC title game, and Miami winning that ACC title game. I've got Ohio State and Oregon out of the Big Ten playing in the regular season. The Oregon winning at home, rematch in the Big Ten title game, and I've got Ohio State winning the rematch. So my two conference champions so far, Miami with a rematch win against Virginia Tech in the ACC championship game, and Ohio State winning the Big Ten over Oregon, a rematch from a regular season game there as well. Next, Big 12. Let's pull that up. We still have the Big 12 and the SEC left to do. We will start with the Big 12 because it just happens to be next on the page here. Oh, before we get to the Big 12, any potential dark horses within the Big 10? All right, Ohio State, perpetually third, the whole always the bridesmaid, never the bride deal, hasn't been able to get over the hump with Michigan and Ohio State every single year in the Big 10 East. Well, there is no Big 10 East anymore, and Penn State doesn't have to play Michigan this year. They do play Ohio State at home. I picked Ohio State to win. If for some reason Penn State pulls off that upset over Ohio State, then that opens up a whole other world of possibilities within the Big Ten, because if Ohio State goes on the road and loses at Oregon and goes on the road and loses at Penn State, that then becomes two Big Ten losses. Not just does it become two Big Ten losses, but those two losses are to other teams that would be expecting to compete for a Big Ten title game, and those other two teams would then hold a tiebreaker over Ohio State. So, for example, let's say Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State all end up at 10-2, but Ohio State lost to both Oregon and Penn State. Oregon and Penn State would play in the Big Ten championship game, and Ohio State would get left out, even though they had the same record, because they lost. Oregon and Penn State would own tiebreakers over Ohio State by beating them during the regular season. Penn State seems like kind of an obvious one, maybe to be third on that list, going back to the odds there. If you're looking at sort of a dark horse, what about Iowa? Now, Iowa's been kind of wasting away in the Big Ten West, winning 8, 9, sometimes 10 games a year, right? Really good defense, no offense at all. Well, they've changed all that around this year. They brought in a new offensive coordinator. Now, I happen to think it's going to take a couple of years for us to see any real improvement offensively under Iowa. I do think we'll see incremental improvements this year, but I think it's gonna be a 2 or 3 year process, I think, to completely get that thing turned around. But if the defense is lights out again, and again, it's a situation where you look at their schedule and you go, you know what? There might not be that many losses here. In fact, I'll put the Iowa schedule up on the screen here because I do think this is a dark horse worth keeping an eye on if you're looking to make a dark horse pick. But when you start to look at their schedule, Illinois State win, Iowa State, I think that should be a win. Now, this is of course, a rivalry game always played early in the year, and we've seen some odd outcomes in this game. We've seen a lot of like 7-6, almost baseball game type scores. We'll see what happens this year. Iowa does get them at home. So, I guess that's a benefit. Troy should be a win. At Minnesota, I feel like is a game Iowa can win. Defense travels, right? Obviously, a lot of this, what Iowa's going to depend on, how good, if good at all that offense is. But I feel like they can win on the road at Minnesota. They get a bye week. Probably going to lose on the road at Ohio State, right? But I think they can beat Washington at home, completely rebuilt Washington team. I think they can beat Michigan State on the road, brand new coaching staff, rebuilding there. Northwestern was surprisingly, I don't know if good is the right word. It was surprising to me to look up at the end of the season and see them sitting on 8 wins or whatever it was. Don't know how good of a team they were. See about them this year. But again, it's homecoming and Iowa gets them at home. That's definitely a game they can win, right? So we're halfway through the schedule and there's really only one game so far with Iowa where you're like, there's no way they're winning that. And that would be the Ohio State game. Wisconsin, this could be a tricky game. Year 2, Luke Fickell, right? Is that offense going to sort of evolve this year like we maybe were told it would last year? More throwing the ball, so more of a sort of downfield passing attack. We'll see. But again, Iowa gets them at home. On the road at UCLA, brand new coaching staff, lost a ton of talent through the portal. Defensive coordinator, now the defensive coordinator at Southern Cal, head coach, now the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. Seems like a mess really at UCLA. Seems like a winnable game for Iowa. Another bye week on the road at Maryland. Again, I'm not saying Iowa's definitely winning these types of games here, but you can't look at this and go, there's no way Iowa's winning at Maryland. Of course they could. And Nebraska, same thing. Like, it wouldn't be shocking to see Iowa go 11-1 with this schedule. Now, I haven't predicted that. I think they probably win 8 or 9 games. But the point is, all they got to do is be a game or two better than that, and they could be sitting there at 10-2 or 11-1 at the end of the season. Not having to play Oregon, not having to play Michigan, not having to play Penn State. I mean, they only play one of the top 4 teams, and that's Ohio State. Okay, they can lose that by 40. The rest of the games on that schedule look winnable to me. Again, there's a big difference between a game being winnable and then actually winning all of those games, and we'll see if Iowa can do that. But if you're looking for a long shot in the Big Ten to at least make the Big Ten title game, maybe that's it. All right, now we can go to the Big 12. Sorry about that. That took me a little longer than I hoped it would. You can see that Utah is actually the favorite here at plus 310, followed up by Kansas State at plus 400. Kansas at plus, actually UCF has moved way up the board. Now, I've been talking about UCF for a couple of months. I guess sort of a tagline I've been using. I think Goose Malzahn is cooking something up down there at Central Florida. I still don't know if they're going to be good enough to make the Big 12 title game, but I do think they'll be good enough to beat a couple of the teams that think they are good enough to get to the Big 12 title game. And if UCF doesn't get to the title game themselves, they may determine who does by knocking off somebody at some point in the season, eliminating them kind of from Big 12 title game contention. I think we'll talk more about UCF when we get to the underdog section here in a minute. I've got Oklahoma State and Utah both at 10-2 during the regular season, and that's going to be good enough for each of those 2 teams to make it to the Big 12 championship game. I've got Oklahoma State facing off against Utah in the Big 12 championship game. Now, Kansas State is very highly rated. Arizona's got a Heisman esque type quarterback. They lost their coach though. Kansas is kind of the wild card. They've got to stay healthy. Jalen Daniels is one of the most exciting players in all of college football if he can make it through the season, right? Texas Tech, are they due for a decent season? Iowa State, Oklahoma State is way down here at plus 700 already. I think they're really good. Kansas State, obviously. And then here you've got UCF at plus 800. But anyway, so I got both these teams. I got Oklahoma State and Utah coming out of the Big 12. I've got them both at 10-2 in the regular season. And again, they play in the regular season. And I've got Oklahoma State winning at home in the regular season against Utah. So we're now 3 for 3 on rematches in conference championship games. I'm not sure how everybody's going to feel like about that. I don't mind rematches in football, but it is sort of a point of contention amongst some fans. One of the things about getting rid of divisions is it increases the likelihood of rematches in conference championship games, as we're seeing my first 3 predictions here for the ACC, the Big 10, and now the Big 12 all involve rematches from the regular season. And like the other two, I think the losing team in the regular season gets revenge in the championship game. I've got Utah beating Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. So our 3 conference champions so far, Miami, Ohio State, and now Utah. And if you're looking for a wild card, an underdog, a dark horse, whatever you want to call it, to potentially come out of the Big 12 and make some noise, my pick would be Central Florida. I think they have quietly built a really good roster down there, mostly through the portal. I mean, they recruit through high school, but not on an elite level. But they've brought in some immediate starting potential type players down there for this season. KJ Jefferson at quarterback, who is nowhere near as good or as talented as Cam Newton was under Goose Malzahn at Auburn back in the day. But he's the same style of player. He's a big, physical, strong running back that can pound it between the tackles and then really soften up the defense for that play action pass over the top. I think Central Florida is going to be a good team that could potentially be really good. I don't think they're elite. I think they're good, could potentially be really good. And like I said, haven't predicted them to make the Big 12 title game, but I definitely think they're good enough to beat some of the teams that maybe do make the Big 12 title game. That's something to consider if you're looking for a long shot. And now, last but not least, we are on to the SEC, and this probably won't come as a surprise to many of you, especially if you have been watching my preview and prediction videos, but there's 4 or 5 teams that a lot of people are talking about heading into the season when it comes to the SEC. Georgia, Bama, Texas, and Ole Miss seem to be, to me, the primary 4 that get mentioned when I talk to college football fans. And then there's not even a second tier. I would call it like a tier 1B would be like Tennessee and Missouri. And that's not me telling you that Tennessee and Missouri aren't where those other 4 are. That's the perception I get from talking to college football fans now for the last 8 months about where the teams sort of stack up within the SEC heading into next season. A couple of teams that I've heard mentioned for potential SEC championship game bursts that I'm just totally not buying. LSU, their defense was horrendous last year. I don't see where it's gotten any better. They've made some obvious coaching changes there on the defensive side of the ball, but they failed to bring in the talent through the transfer portal that they needed on the defensive line and the secondary. I think that's going to be a big weakness for them again this year. Plus, even though I like Nussmeier at QB, he's not going to give them what Jaden Daniels did last year. Not the dynamic playmaking sort of Heisman real highlight plays from week to week that of course led to him actually winning the Heisman last year. I just don't think you're going to have that. And I think that's going to catch up with LSU a couple of times over the course of the season and prevent them from making the SEC title game. Same with Texas A&M. I don't think they have what it takes to get there. I like the hire of Mike Elko, and they've got a good talent base there. I feel like A&M needs a year or two under Mike Elko to sort of elevate to the level that some of those teams are at. But let's talk about some of these other teams here. Again, I've done prediction and preview videos for Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU, Oklahoma, pretty much any contender you can name within the SEC. I had nobody at 12-0 in the SEC. Nobody. I have one team, make it 2 teams at 11-1. Another rematch, Georgia and Ole Miss in the SEC title game is my prediction for 2024. Georgia travels to the Grove late in the season to play Ole Miss. I have predicted a Georgia loss and an Ole Miss win at home over Georgia in the regular season. Ole Miss with several big wins during the course of the season. Same with Georgia. Georgia with wins on the road at Alabama, on the road at Texas, home against Tennessee. I think would be big wins for Georgia. Ole Miss picking up some key wins as well, both ending at 11-1. And I don't have any other teams in the SEC at 11-1. I've got Texas at 10-2. I've got Bama at 10-2. I've got Tennessee at 10-2. All three of those teams sort of one game out of the SEC title game. I think I've got Missouri at 9-3 or 8-4. LSU somewhere around 8 wins, I believe. Texas A&M 7 to 8 wins. I've got Georgia and Ole Miss facing off in a rematch in Atlanta, a rematch of the regular season game. And just like with the other three, I think the team that loses in the regular season wins the rematch. I've got Georgia beating Ole Miss in Atlanta in the SEC championship. Game. I'm not sure if we looked at the odds or not. Georgia's the favorite at plus 190 to win the SEC, followed by Texas at plus 325. Ole Miss is actually third. If you imagine you've been away from college football for 4 or 5 years and whatever, in a coma, whatever, and you wake up, and the first thing you do when you wake up is go to look up the odds to win the SEC for this season, and you see Ole Miss with the third best odds, better odds even than Bama. I mean, I don't know if anybody saw this coming 2 years ago, but this is where the odds market is at right now. Bama in fourth at plus 700. And then you've got LSU at 950, Tennessee at 1,000, so forth and so on. So I've got number 1 versus number 3, Georgia versus Ole Miss. Number 1 in the Georgia, number 1 in the odds, Ole Miss number 3 in the odds, in a rematch in Atlanta for the SEC championship game. If you're looking for a dark horse out of the SEC, what about Tennessee? Tennessee's got a chance to prove some points over the course of the season. They play a top 15 opponent early on, NC State. They have a chance to make an early statement in that game. In week 4 or 5, I believe it's week 4, they play on the road at Oklahoma in what will be Oklahoma's first ever SEC conference game. Not only that, Josh Heupel, of course, was a former player and coach at Oklahoma, so there's a lot of backstories and side stories to that game. Oklahoma's first SEC game, Tennessee's chance to sort of, start the SEC season with the 1-0 as opposed to the 0-1 was a huge game. I've got them winning that one. Their next sort of big test would come at home against Alabama. Now, Alabama has dominated them over the last 20 years, but Tennessee did beat them the last time they played in Knoxville 2 seasons ago in that wild sort of back and forth shootout game that ended with the Tennessee a missed Bama field goal followed by a made Tennessee field goal. I've got Tennessee losing that game to Bama. If they win it, then Tennessee is going to put themselves right smack in the middle of the SEC championship picture. And they are capable of winning that game. It's going to come down to how good Nico is and how quick he gets good, right? They play on the road at Georgia. Obviously a chance to make a huge statement there. I think that's the game they're least likely to win of any game on their schedule. It's away from home. I think Georgia's the best team they play. I think there's a better chance they beat Bama at home than Georgia on the road, for example. But they could win both. But if all they really got to do is split those two. If they somehow could split Bama and Georgia, they'd be right in the middle of the hunt there for the SEC title. So if I was going to pick somebody sort of not your top 2 or 3 favorites, maybe Tennessee would be something to look at there. But there you go. I can't wait to read the comments on this one for everybody to tell me how wrong I am. But just to recap here, your ACC championship game, Virginia Tech versus Miami. Miami wins. Your Big Ten championship game, Ohio State versus Oregon. Ohio State wins. Your Big 12 championship game, Central Florida versus Utah. Utah wins. And your SEC championship game, Georgia versus Ole Miss. And Georgia wins. All 4 of those games are rematches from the regular season. And in all 4 cases, I've got the loser of the regular season game getting revenge and winning in the conference championship game, which of course gives them first round byes in this year's playoffs. So Miami, Ohio State, Utah, and Georgia would all get first round byes. My guess is the loser of all of these conference championship games would most likely still get in. If Virginia Tech is 10-2, well, I don't know. Virginia Tech would be a maybe because I don't know what their best win would be at that point. Virginia Tech would be on the fence if they lost at 10-2 to Miami in the ACC championship. They'd then be 10-3, but like Oregon would still get in. They'd be 12-1 after that Big Ten championship game loss. Oak State, again, on the fence here. I've got Oak State at 10-2 in the regular season and then losing in the conference championship game, which would put them at 10-3. I tend to think these teams probably get in anyway, but we'll see how the committee is going to handle it. And then Georgia and Ole Miss, each at 11-1. I think regardless of who wins or loses, both of those teams would get in. The winner would get the first round bye, ranked somewhere 1 through 4. The loser most likely ranked somewhere 5 through 8, hosting a first round playoff game. All right, there you go. Tell me down below how dumb I am. Hope you enjoyed your weekend. Have a good morning.